Hello there. Thank you for being here tonight. Maybe it's late where you are. Maybe the day is still hanging around a little. Either way, I'm glad you're here. You didn't have to choose this moment, but somehow you did, and that feels worth acknowledging. Perhaps you're listening from a quiet room, or a familiar chair, or a place where sleep usually comes slowly. Maybe you're tired in the body, maybe just in the mind. Either way, you're here now, and tonight, we'll move slowly. No rush at all. Before we name where we're going, let me ask you something simple. Where are you listening from tonight? What does the air feel like around you? Warm? Cool? Still? Is there a sound nearby? Or is it mostly quiet? You don't need to answer out loud, just notice. Because the story we're drifting toward comes from a world where noticing mattered deeply. A world where names carried weight, where memory was pressed into clay, where stories were not entertainment, but explanation. Long before modern nights like this one, there were people who looked up at the same sky. They watched the same slow stars. They wondered why work was hard, why bodies tired, why order needed effort. Somewhere in that wondering, a story took shape, not written all at once, not explained cleanly. It survives now as fragments, broken tablets, careful translations, pauses where meaning slips away. And at the centre of those fragments, there are two figures, one associated with water, wisdom, and careful planning, the other tied to earth, birth, and the shaping of life, their names, Enki and Ninhursag. In the ancient Sumerian texts, these figures are not distant gods in the clouds. They move through rivers and soil. They argue, they correct mistakes, they solve problems that feel surprisingly familiar. One of those problems was labour, the weight of work, the strain of maintaining a world, and so the text describes something unusual, an act of creation that feels deliberate, measured, almost reluctant, a being formed not for glory, but for help. Some read these stories as myth, others hear echoes of something older, harder to name. What if they were symbolic? What if they preserved memory rather than instruction? We don't rush to decide. Not tonight. This is a story about the Sumerians, about Enki and Ninhursag, about the idea of a created worker, a hybrid being shaped to carry burden so others would not have to. It's also a story about how humans explain effort, and responsibility, and origin. Before we go any further, there's one small thing I'd like to ask. If this space has felt calm for you before, or if it does tonight, a like or subscribe would mean a great deal. It helps this quiet corner reach others who might need it too. Thank you. Now, let's settle in just a little. Feel where your body is supported. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breath slow. Just enough to notice it. That's all. No technique, no effort. Because the world we're about to step into moved slowly too. Rivers wandered. Clay dried in the sun. Time stretched wide. Long before any story is pressed into clay. Before names settle into memory, this land already knows how to wait. The ground rests beneath an open sky, wide and patient, shaped by forces that do not hurry. The air moves slowly here, carrying dust, moisture, and the faint smell of water long before water is seen. When you imagine this place, try not to picture cities yet. There are no walls, no temples, no voices calling across streets, only land, stretching outward, quiet and alive in subtle ways. Long before the Sumerians named anything, the earth is already working. Rivers wander without permission, carving soft paths through soil, flooding, retreating, returning again. The Tigris and the Euphrates are not yet borders or lifelines. They are simply moving water, restless, unpredictable, generous and dangerous at once. Perhaps the mornings feel cool here, even under a bright sky. The ground holds night's memory a little longer. When the sun rises, it does so without ceremony, light spreading gently across reeds, marshes, and open plains. There are places where the land smells damp, rich, almost sweet. In other stretches, the earth is dry, cracked, waiting. The wind moves freely, unbothered by buildings, carrying seeds, dust, and silence. Long before written time, this region exists between extremes, flood and drought, growth and loss, Patience and sudden change. When the rivers swell, they bring life. They also bring uncertainty. Fields appear where none existed before, then vanish again beneath water. The stars above watch this cycle repeat. They rise and set in patterns so slow they feel eternal. The same constellations that will later guide. Calendars already hang here, indifferent, steady. Perhaps this is why people will one day watch the sky so closely. When the land shifts without warning, the heavens feel reliable. Long before cities form, humans move through this space lightly. Small groups, temporary shelters, paths that fade quickly. They learn the moods of water, the timing of seasons, the feel of soil between their fingers. When the ground is wet, it clings softly. When it dries, it hardens, smooth, workable. Clay waits here, abundant, quiet, unnoticed for now. Time moves differently at this scale. Generations pass like breaths. The land does not keep count. Long before kings, long before temples, long before stories of gods and creation, there is survival. There is watching. There is remembering without writing. Perhaps fires glow faintly at night, small, controlled, fragile against the darkness. Smoke drifts upward, briefly touching the stars, then fading. The silence here is not empty. It hums softly, with insects, distant water, wind brushing tall grass. In the stillness, the land listens too. When floods come, they arrive without apology. Water spreads slowly at first, then suddenly, swallowing paths, reshaping ground. When it recedes, it leaves behind dark soil, heavy with promise. Maybe this rhythm teaches patience, maybe it teaches respect, or maybe it simply demands attention. The people who will one day settle here are shaped by this uncertainty. They learn to wait, they learn to adapt. The land is not just a setting, but a teacher. It is not just soil, but memory made physical. Long before any god is named, long before Enki or Ninhursag appear in story, the environment already holds the question. How does order emerge from change? Above it all, the sky remains calm, clouds drift slowly, shadows move across plains, night arrives gently, cooling the earth, quieting movement. Stars appear again. They always do. Perhaps someone looks up and wonders. Perhaps they do not have words yet. The wondering exists anyway. Time circles. Flood follows drought. Growth follows loss. The land keeps repeating itself, patiently, until someone begins to notice patterns. When clay dries in the sun, it hardens. It remembers the shape it was given. This is important, though no one knows it yet. Long before tablets carry stories, the ground itself is already a record. Layer upon layer, flood upon flood, were each leaving a mark. The silence deepens, and somewhere within this vast waiting, conditions gather. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just slowly enough that it feels natural. The rivers settle into more predictable paths, for a time. The seasons begin to repeat with enough consistency to trust. Perhaps this is when staying becomes possible, when watching turns into planning, when memory begins to need a place to rest. The stars continue their steady, their movement. They have seen this before, elsewhere, countless times, and as the land breathes, and the water moves, and the sky holds its quiet watch, something new prepares to emerge. Not yet, but soon enough. Long before any city rose from the mud, long before hands shaped bricks or voices named gods, this land breathed in slow cycles. The air feels heavier near the water, cool at dawn, warming gently as the sun lifts. Reeds sway without pattern, brushing against one another with a soft dry sound. The smell here is damp earth, river water, living plants breaking down and beginning again. When the rivers overflow, they do so quietly at first. Water slips beyond its banks, spreading across low ground, pooling, settling. The land accepts it without resistance. Silt drifts downward, fine and dark, resting gently where it falls. Perhaps if you stood here then, your feet would sink slightly into the soil. Not mud exactly, but something soft, workable, alive. The ground holds warmth from the day before. At night it cools slowly. releasing heat back into the air. Long before boundaries exist, the rivers choose their own paths. They curve, split, rejoin, never asking permission. When the water retreats, it leaves behind more than moisture. It leaves memory. Seeds take hold easily here. Grasses grow tall, bending under their own weight. Insects hum steadily, a constant low sound that fills the silence without breaking it. Birds pass overhead, their shadows gliding across the ground. When the wind moves across open water, it carries a faint mineral smell, not unpleasant, just present. The kind of smell that lingers in the nose without demanding attention. Long before farming is understood, growth is everywhere. It arrives without effort. It disappears just as easily. Perhaps people notice this first. That food appears, then vanishes. That water gives, then takes away. When the rivers rise too high, shelters are lost. When they stay low too long, thirst returns. Nothing here is stable for long. The stars above remain unchanged. They rise in familiar patterns, night after night. Orion steps across the sky slowly, exactly as he will thousands of years later. Maybe someone notices that the sky never floods. Maybe that steadiness feels comforting. Long before calendars, long before writing, people begin to feel time in cycles. Wet, dry, light, dark, plenty, absence. The land teaches repetition. It also teaches patience. When fires are lit near the water, the smoke moves lazily upward. It smells of reeds, of dried grass, of warmth. The crackle is soft, not urgent. Silence returns quickly after voices fade. Long before cities, there is gathering. Small groups settle where water lingers longest. They stay a little more each season. Perhaps they begin to recognize certain bends in the river. Places that flood reliably. Places where soil feels richer beneath the fingers. The clay here is smooth when wet, cool to the touch. When shaped, it holds. This matters later. When the sun climbs higher, heat settles in slowly. The air shimmers faintly above the ground. Sweat forms easily, evaporates just as slowly. Long before tools are refined, hands learn. They learn how much pressure soil can take. They learn when to wait. The land responds to attention, not quickly, but consistently. Perhaps this is when staying becomes a choice, not permanent, but intentional. When floods recede, they leave patterns behind, thin lines of debris, subtle ridges, clues written softly across the ground. Somewhere, someone begins to remember these signs, not as stories yet, as feeling. The sky darkens gently at night. Stars appear one by one. Their light feels cooler somehow, distant, steady. The same sky watches over every camp. It does not choose favourites. Long before temples, long before gods, take shape, there is observation. Watching water rise, watching plants return, watching the same stars move again and again. Maybe this repetition feels reassuring. Maybe it invites explanation. The rivers continue their work, slowly, patiently. They reshape the land without force, without intention. The ground grows deeper with each flood, layer upon layer, unseen accumulation. Time moves on. When people return to the same place season after season, marks remain. Paths harden slightly. Ash mixes with soil. Small changes build. This is how landscapes remember humans. Gently. Long before writing, long before myth. The environment prepares the question. How can order be kept? How can labour be shared? The stars watch in silence. They have seen this before, perhaps not here, but somewhere. As the rivers settle into more predictable rhythms, as people linger longer near their banks, the land shifts from passage to place. And in that quiet shift, the first, outlines of something new begin to form. Long before any city rose from the soil, long before the first wall held shape, this place rests in a careful balance. Morning arrives gently, cool air brushing skin, the ground firm beneath bare feet. Mist lingers near the water, thin, patient, lifting only when the sun gains confidence. The smell here is layered. Wet reeds, warm earth, faint smoke from last night's fire. When the land is quiet like this, It feels as though it is listening. Long before language fixes meaning, before symbols carry instruction, people move through this space slowly. They follow familiar paths, not marked, but remembered. When the rivers shift, they adjust without complaint. Shelters are temporary, light enough to abandon, easy enough to rebuild. Perhaps this teaches flexibility. Maybe it teaches humility. When the seasons change, they do so without warning. Rain arrives suddenly, heavy, drumming against leaves and skin. The earth darkens, softens, opens. Water pools everywhere, reflecting the sky in fragments. The stars disappear behind cloud, then return just as quietly. They wait out storms without concern. Long before ownership exists, the land is shared. Food is gathered where it appears. Fish are caught when the water allows. Nothing is stored for long. This is a world of immediacy, of presence. When night falls, darkness spreads evenly. No lamps yet, only fire. Small, contained. The air cools quickly after sunset. Insects grow louder. The river sounds deeper, slower. Perhaps someone stares into the flames and wonders. Not why exactly, just wonders. Long before gods are described, there is awe. The sky feels enormous at night. Stars crowd the darkness, steady, countless. The Milky Way stretches faintly overhead, a pale river answering the darker one below. When people lie back and look up, time stretches. The same stars return night after night. They do not hurry. Long before calendars, this repetition feels meaningful. The land below continues its quiet work. Floodwaters deposit silt. Plants grow and decay. Animals move through without leaving lasting trace. The soil deepens slowly, patiently. When hands dig into the ground, they meet resistance, then give. The texture is smooth, cool, cooperative. Clay waits beneath the surface, unnoticed, abundant. This matters later, long before writing, long before tools refine. Hands remember. They learn pressure, they learn timing, they learn restraint. Silence returns often here. When groups gather, they do so briefly. Stories are shared through gesture, tone, repetition. Nothing is fixed yet. Everything shifts. Perhaps this freedom feels natural. Perhaps permanence has not yet suggested itself. When the rivers behave for several seasons in a row, something changes. Staying becomes easier. Patterns become visible. The stars above confirm this steadiness. Their paths remain unchanged. Their presence reassures. Long before temples, long before rulers, trust begins to form. Trust in water, trust in seasons. Trust that tomorrow will resemble yesterday just enough. Time slows. The land begins to feel familiar rather than temporary. Paths grow firmer underfoot. Ash mixes with soil. Subtle marks accumulate. This is how places begin. Perhaps someone notices that returning to the same spot saves effort. Maybe gathering close to water feels efficient. Maybe shared labour feels lighter. These thoughts are not yet named. They drift. When the sun rises now, it finds people still here, not passing through, waiting. The air warms gradually. Shadows shorten. The day settles in. The sky remains vast. The stars retreat without drama. Long before stories of creation, the conditions for them assemble quietly, not through command, through repetition. The land offers stability just long enough for memory to deepen, for habits to form, for questions to linger. Silence holds this moment gently, and as the rivers continue their slow instruction, as people linger a little longer with each passing season, the quiet world begins to edge towards something new, not yet a civilization, but no longer only passing through. When the first archaeologists brushed away the soil, what appeared was not a story, but a surface. Clay, baked by sun and time, cool beneath careful fingers. It feels smooth in places, rough in others, edges softened by centuries of waiting. The light catches faint lines pressed into it, deliberate, repeated, patient. These are not decorations yet. They are marks. Long before anyone called this place Sumer, people settled along the lower reaches of the rivers. sites like Eridu, Uruk, and begin to appear in the archaeological record around 5400 to 4000 BCE. Low mounds rise gently from the plain, layers of living stacked one upon another. When excavators dig downward, they move through time. Each layer feels slightly different. Ash, broken pottery, compacted floors. The smell of earth deepens, cool and mineral. Perhaps the most surprising thing is how ordinary it all feels. Homes built of mud brick, simple tools, daily life pressed into the ground. Some believe these early settlements grow slowly, without sudden invention. Others suggest moments of rapid change, brief surges of organisation. The truth, as always, rests somewhere quieter. When pottery fragments are lifted into the light, their surfaces show care. Patterns repeat, shapes are consistent, hands remembered what worked. Radiocarbon dating places these layers firmly in the late Neolithic and early Chalcolithic periods. Not mythic time, human time, and yet, something new is happening here. Among the most striking finds are clay tokens. Small shapes formed deliberately. Cones, spheres, discs. They fit easily in the palm. Perhaps they represent goods, maybe measures of grain, livestock, labour owed. Some believe they are accounting tools, others suggest ritual meaning. We don't know for certain. The tokens remain quiet. When these tokens are later sealed inside clay envelopes and marks are pressed on the outside, something changes. The mark stands in for the thing. Representation appears. This is where many scholars trace the origin of writing. Not poetry, not prayer, administration. The earliest proto-cuneiform tablets date to around 3300 BCE. They list rations, workers, quantities, beer, grain, time. When you look closely, the impressions are uneven. Some are deep, others faint. The stylus slips sometimes. A human hand hesitated here. Perhaps the most telling detail is what these tablets care about. They track labour, they measure output, they count people. The system was not just symbolic, it was practical. Some tablets record groups assigned to tasks, men, women, children, work measured in days. The clay remembers this. When archaeologists translate these early texts, they move carefully. Signs shift meaning across centuries. Context matters. Some believe these records reflect temple economies. Others see early state control emerging. Perhaps both are true. The buildings themselves suggest organisation. Large communal structures appear at Eridu and Uruk. Thick walls, repeated rebuilding on the same footprint. The air inside reconstructed spaces feels cool, even under heat. Mud brick holds temperature gently. When sunlight enters through small openings, dust motes drift slowly, quietly. The scale of construction raises questions. Who coordinated this work? How labour was motivated? Why people agreed to participate? We may never know fully. One of the most enduring mysteries lies not in stone, but in story. Later Sumerian texts, written centuries after these early settlements, describe gods complaining of labour, of toil being heavy, of work needing relief. Perhaps these myths echo lived experience. Maybe they preserve memory, transformed into narrative. The figures of Enki and Ninhursag appear later, around the early 2nd millennium BCE. Their stories are preserved on tablets found at sites like Nippur. They speak of creation, of shaping beings, of assigning roles. Some read these texts symbolically. Others wonder if they encode social change. Were they reflecting the organisation of labour already visible in the archaeological record? Were they offering explanation rather than instruction? The tablets do not say. When you touch the replicas in museums today, the surface feels cool, smooth where fingers pressed signs. Time collapses briefly. The same stars that watched the first marks appear still hang overhead. They have barely shifted. Perhaps that steadiness made recording time feel worthwhile. The emergence of writing does not arrive suddenly. It drifts into being. Gradually, each mark solves a small problem. Memory, coordination, fairness, perhaps. And yet, each solution introduces new questions. Who is counted? Who is not? Who benefits from being recorded? The silence between the signs grows louder here. Archaeology gives us objects. Texts give us voices. Neither gives certainty. Still, the pieces begin to align. The settlements grow denser. as records multiply, as stories form around work and creation, a more complex world emerges, not all at once, not without cost. When archaeologists lift later tablets from the earth, what emerges is no longer only numbers or tallies, but voices. The clay feels firmer now, fired more intentionally, its surface smoother under the fingertips. Light glances across wedge-shaped signs, sharper, more confident, arranged in careful rows. These marks are no longer just records, they are sentences. Long before these tablets are translated, they already know how to wait. The texts begin to appear in greater number around 2600 to 2100 BCE, during what scholars call the early dynastic period. They come from places like Nippur, Lagash, and Ur. Some are administrative, others are hymns, myths, debates, reflections pressed into clay. When you read them today, slowly, something shifts. The concerns feel familiar. Work, order, responsibility. Perhaps that is why they endure. Among these texts, figures begin to repeat. Names surface again and again. Enki, associated with water, wisdom, and clever solutions. Ninhursag, linked to earth, birth, and the shaping of bodies. They are not distant here. They speak, they argue, they correct each other. In one myth, preserved in fragments now called Enki and Ninma, the gods grow weary of labour, digging canals, maintaining order, sustaining the world. Some believe this reflects temple labour systems. Others suggest it mirrors the rise of organised workforces. Perhaps it is both, memory layered with meaning. The text describes a solution, a being shaped from clay, mixed with something else, given form. The language is careful, measured, not dramatic. This is not creation for beauty. It is creation for function. When scholars translate these passages, they pause. Words shift meaning across centuries. The term for human, lu, also means worker. Perhaps that overlap matters. Maybe it always did. In the myth, Enki provides insight. Ninhursag shapes. The result is imperfect at first. Several forms are created, some unable to work as intended. This detail lingers. Why include imperfection? Why describe adjustment rather than mastery? Some scholars see compassion here. Others see social explanation, a way of accounting for difference. The tablets do not clarify. When you touch the impressions left by the scribe, you can feel hesitation. The stylus pressed deeper in some signs, lifted lightly in others. A human hand thought, carefully here. Other texts, like the Atrahasis epic, written later around 1700 BCE, return to the same theme. The lesser gods complain of toil. The burden is too great. Again, a being is created to bear it. Perhaps these stories preserve the transition from small communities to complex states, when labour becomes abstract, when work is counted, assigned, measured. The archaeological record supports this shift. Large-scale irrigation works appear. Canals stretch across the landscape. They require coordination. When you stand near reconstructed canal paths today, the ground slopes gently. Water still wants to flow there. The effort required must have been immense. Thousands of hands. Years of maintenance. Who organised this? Who benefited? Who carried the weight? We don't know. Administrative tablets list workers by category. Free labourers, dependents, enslaved individuals. The lines are thin. The distinctions blur. Perhaps the myths provided meaning for this structure. A way to say, this is how the world was arranged. Not cruelly, but necessarily. The creation stories do not celebrate domination. They explain distribution. That matters. When Enki and Ninhursag argue in the texts, it feels domestic, familiar, a disagreement over method rather than intent. This is not a story of conquest. It is a story of problem solving. Some modern readers imagine advanced knowledge here. Others see metaphor alone. Perhaps the truth rests somewhere quieter. The Sumerians were not describing genetics. They were describing purpose. Still, the language of mixing, shaping, assigning roles invites wonder. Why clay? Why water? Why deliberate design? The land itself offers clues. Clay everywhere. Water essential. Creation uses what is close at hand. The stars overhead remain unchanged during all of this. They watch scribes work by lamplight. They watch canals fill. They watch stories settle into form. Perhaps that steadiness made it easier to imagine order. The archaeological record continues to grow. New tablets are found. Old translations are revised. Meanings shift gently. Questions remain. Were these stories meant to be literal, or explanatory, or comforting? Did they justify labour systems, or reflect them? We may never know fully. What we do know is that something important happened here. A moment when work, memory, and meaning converged. The myths did not appear in isolation. They grew from lived experience, pressed into clay by hands shaped by labour themselves. The silence between the lines feels intentional. As the cities expand, as writing becomes more fluid, as gods gain clearer identities, these early stories prepare the ground. They explain why people work, why order matters, why creation is rarely perfect. When the walls of ancient Uruk were uncovered, what emerged wasn't just architecture, it was intention. Stone foundations, layered mud brick, worn from centuries of sun and wind. The texture of the bricks feels dry and crumbly now, but once they held warmth and weight. The air around the site today is thick with dust, but in the past, it carried the sounds of tools, voices, decisions. Uruk, around 3500 to 3100 BCE, marks something new, not just in size, but in complexity. It stretches beyond what came before, both physically and conceptually. This city is not a loose cluster of dwellings, but a plan, broad avenues, districts for crafts, a central raised temple platform, the ziggurat of Anu, one of the earliest known, rises like a patient stair toward the heavens. Its bricks were handmade, each one shaped, dried, and placed with care. Thousands upon thousands, laid by human hands. Perhaps those hands belong to the very being spoken of in later texts. The workers created to serve the gods, the hybrids formed to lift the burden of divine labour. That's one possibility. In the layers of Uruk, archaeologists find beveled rim bowls, simple, uniform, mass-produced. So many that their presence begins to whisper something else. Standardization, rationing, maybe even institutional feeding. Some suggest these bowls were given to workers as part of payment. Others think they served religious functions, perhaps both. The scale of the site supports the idea of organised labour. You don't build temples like these casually. You don't dig canals without structure. And yet, the stories written later never describe force. They speak instead of divine agreement, of decisions made in the heavens to solve a problem of balance. Maybe this framing was intentional, to give purpose to work, to soften obligation with myth. Cuneiform tablets from the late Uruk period begin to show clearer roles. Scribes, overseers, labour groups, even references to quotas. A workforce is emerging, not in abstract, but in visible terms. One text lists food allotments for temple, workers. Another details construction materials distributed by a priest. These are not stories, they are records. But the presence of story grows alongside record. The myths of Enki and Ninhursag gain shape in this time. They don't describe random divine acts. They reflect what is now required on Earth. Order, hierarchy, creation with purpose. In places like Eridu, Kish, and Lagash, we see variations, each site with its own style, yet connected by a shared logic, the logic of centralization. Eridu is believed to be among the oldest settlements, perhaps as early as 5400 BCE, but its temple expands again and again, built atop itself, layer after layer, not rebuilt elsewhere, but on the same spot. Perhaps that's not just convenience, maybe it's memory, or reverence. The city doesn't forget its sacred heart. In the same cities, archaeologists find cylinder seals, tiny objects, but with immense importance. When rolled over clay, they reveal scenes, rows of people, animals, divine figures with horned crowns, sometimes a seated god. A human approaches with hands raised. Perhaps it's Enki, perhaps it's someone else. Some seals show what looks like surgery, others strange tools. Interpretations vary. The meaning isn't fixed, but the presence of purpose is clear. These are not random marks. They communicate. They record. They reinforce. There are still questions. Why did this scale of city life appear here and not elsewhere first? How was labour truly organised, and was it voluntary? Were the hybrid beings of myth meant to be real or metaphor? And if they were metaphor, what exactly were they explaining? We may never fully know. The ruins do not speak directly. The clay does not explain itself. It just holds what was pressed into it. Still, when you stand in the middle of a city like Uruk, or near the ziggurat at Ur, a feeling emerges. The people who built this did so together. With effort, with structure, with belief in something larger. Above all this, the stars remain steady, the same constellations, the same nightly rhythm. Perhaps the stars offered reassurance. Perhaps they witnessed the creation of new kinds of being, not divine, not animal, but something in between, human, hybrid, helper, worker. The myths say these beings were shaped with care, not cruelty, born not of punishment, but solution. That nuance matters. As we move forward in our journey, the systems now in place begin to bloom. The cities grow larger, the stories grow deeper, the gods take on clearer roles, and the being shaped from clay, from thought, from need, begins to live in full view. At its height, the city must have hummed with quiet purpose, not just noise, but rhythm. The rising of the sun over temple walls, the soft splash of water drawn from canals, the gentle tapping of styluses against damp clay. Imagine standing at the edge of Ur or Nippur in the early mornings when shadows stretch long across the streets and the scent of baking bread mingles with the earthy wetness of overnight irrigation. This is not chaos. This is a city in alignment, with river, with sky, with law. Each person knew their place, their duty. Scribes reported to tablet houses, recording rations and rituals. Priests ascended temple stairs at dawn, carrying offerings, chanting words that had not changed in generations. Farmers opened canals before the light grew too strong, guiding water toward fields that had been measured, taxed, and sanctified. The temple was not just a building, it was the centre of gravity. In Sumerian cities, especially in the sacred city of Nippur, the temple complex dominated the skyline. Eka, the mountain house, was the dwelling of the gods, and yet it was built by hands, maintained by workers, supplied by fields. Perhaps the stories of Enki and Ninhursag, of beings formed to ease divine labour, found their deepest resonance here. These cities were more than communities. They were engines of divine service. Every task, even the most mundane, was a contribution to cosmic balance. Imagine walking through the central courtyard of a ziggurat. The stone beneath your feet still holds warmth from the previous day. The walls rise high, plastered smooth, painted with deep blues and ochres now faded by time. You hear the soft rustle of robes, a priest passing by, silent, deliberate. The very structure of the city mirrored the order the gods were said to demand. The lower quarters held workshops, kilns, potters' yards. Above them, the temples. Above the temples, the heavens. The people of this world were not just labourers, they were innovators. They designed and maintained vast irrigation networks, canals stretched for miles, cut with bronze tools, stabilised with reeds and packed mud. Water tamed without violence made the desert bloom. They understood measurement, angles, movement, the division of the day into hours, the tracking of celestial events. Somewhere, a scribe scratched down the path of Venus. Another traced lunar cycles, not for curiosity alone, but to time the planting, to guide the rituals, to serve the story that bound heaven and earth. Even now, cuneiform tablets record their observations, the stars, mapped, the planets, named. Perhaps it is no accident that Enki, Lord of Wisdom, is linked to both water and the stars. Both are necessary, both are difficult to grasp, both flow quietly, but shape everything. And then, there is the quieter world, the world of the market, of mothers and children, of songs hummed while grinding grain. Imagine sitting beside a courtyard hearth in the late afternoon. The smell of barley cakes hangs in the air. Children chase one another between mud brick walls. A woman leans over her loom, fingers, moving without thought, rhythm learned over years. They knew stories too, not written, but lived. Perhaps some spoke of the beings created by gods. Perhaps they saw themselves in those tales, born not just of flesh, but of purpose. The worker, honoured. The task, sacred. In these moments, the myth becomes something more than story. It becomes identity. At night, the city quiets, the fires dim, the stars return. From rooftops and temple stairs, the same constellations emerge. The bull of heaven, Inanna's path, the seven sages, signs, symbols, reminders. Priests climb to high platforms, reading sky signs, offering chants, their breath visible in the cool air. The clay tablets wait nearby, ready to receive new marks. Every motion has meaning, every gesture, part of a larger cycle. Perhaps that is what defined the Golden Age. Not peace, not perfection, but alignment. Everything had a place. Everyone had a role. Even the gods had responsibilities. There are cracks, even now. The tablets mention debts, complaints, absences. The canals need repair. The temple stores grow thin. Somewhere, someone questions. Were the gods satisfied? Was the work shared fairly? Did the hybrid beings truly find balance between worlds? We may never know. The clay does not explain. It only records. And so, the Golden Age shimmers, not as perfection, but as purpose. A time when myth and labour were not separate, when the stars above were not distant, but participatory. Yet beneath this order, something stirs. A mystery remains. At the height of Sumer's flourishing, the power of the cities was not only found in ziggurats or myths, but in the steady breath of ordinary life. Imagine walking a quiet side street of Ur during a soft afternoon. Dust settles gently onto smooth mud brick walls. Narrow paths wind between low homes. The distant sound of a lyre filters through an open doorway. It's not grandeur you feel, but continuity. A city, breathing slowly through each person who moves within it. Inside one home, a woman kneels beside a flat stone. She grinds grain with rhythmic pressure, stone against stone. The floor beneath her is worn smooth, swept clean with a bundled reed brush. Her child plays nearby with a toy made of clay, shaped by hand, pinched with care, maybe with laughter. The smell of cooking barley and something faintly sweet fills the room. While myths spoke of hybrid beings shaped for labour, the real Sumerians built their lives around complex systems of cooperation. Work was constant, yet varied. Weavers knotted wool into delicate patterns. Bronze workers smelted metal over glowing coals. Brewers stirred thick mash in clay vats. Each occupation had its own guild, its own god, its own responsibilities. Perhaps this is how balance was maintained, by weaving identity through function, belief through repetition. In cuneiform tablets from Lagash and Ur, we find detailed records of everything from wool production to brick quotas. Some texts list hundreds of workers assigned to a temple estate. Their names are forgotten, but their roles remain. Imagine one of them, stepping into a workshop just after dawn, the air still cool, tools lined along a low bench, yesterday's progress still drying in the corner. He doesn't question why he works, he simply does. The people of Sumer didn't separate the practical from the divine. Time itself was measured by the stars, the sun, the movements of sacred celestial bodies. Lunar months were carefully tracked, festivals aligned with solstices, equinoxes, conjunctions. The god Nanna, associated with the moon, watched over both the night sky and the city of Ur. Inanna, goddess of Venus and transformation, brought beauty, danger, fertility, war. Their rhythms shaped not only belief but planting, harvesting, offerings. At night, the stars returned with quiet precision. Farmers, priests, even children may have looked up and whispered thanks. The sky was both compass and calendar, and perhaps memory. In the larger cities, near the temples, the tablet houses held the scribes. Young boys trained under strict instruction, they copied the same proverbs again and again. They learned measurement, mathematics, law. One tablet found near Nippur reads, "A scribe without tablet is not a scribe." Another simply, "Do not be idle." The tools of their trade were humble: clay, a reed stylus, steady hands, and yet they preserved the voices of a civilization. Perhaps the boy writing those proverbs didn't know his work would last millennia. Perhaps he was just trying to avoid another reprimand from his teacher. Even that, in its own way, is sacred. The calendar was filled with festivals for the gods, for the seasons, for the renewal of kingship. During these moments, the entire city shifted. Priests led processions through the streets. Statues of gods were washed, clothed, fed. People offered beer, bread, dates, incense. Perhaps these rituals were not just about pleasing unseen powers. Perhaps they reminded the people of their place in the pattern. When the story of Enki and Ninhursag was told, it may have served more than religious purpose. It offered reassurance that their labour had meaning, that the gods too once struggled, once made errors, once sought balance. Nothing here was wasted. Even broken tools were repurposed. Old bricks were reused. The city grew slowly, carefully, with respect for what had come before. Imagine walking near the city walls, late in the day, the sun low, casting long shadows across the canal. You pass someone hauling water, someone patching a wall, someone lighting a small clay lamp, and in that moment, it feels like time has paused, but it does not. The river continues to shift, the stars continue their path, and slowly, change begins to whisper through the system. Even in their strongest days, the cities of Sumer faced challenges: salinization of soil from over-irrigation, growing complexity in temple administration, conflicts between cities, each claiming divine favour. The system that once brought stability began to strain, but that part of the story comes later. For now, the Sumerians live within their rhythm, a civilization shaped by river and sky, by clay and belief, by the careful balance between toil and meaning, and yet, beneath the daily rituals, behind the records, beyond the ziggurats, something else was always present. At the height of the Sumerian Golden Age, the temple was more than a structure. It was a living presence, a centre not only of religion, but of power, administration, and cosmic order. Each brick, each step, each offering contributed to something much larger than the individual. Imagine walking the broad staircase of a ziggurat at dusk. The sky deepens to indigo above you. The smell of burnt cedar and sweet dates hangs in the warm air. Your bare feet press gently into each sun-baked step, worn smooth by generations. Above you, the stars begin to stir. The ziggurats rose in stages, 3, sometimes 7 tiers. Their design mirrored the layered heavens. The belief that between earth and the realm of the gods, there were steps, bridges, gateways, built of mud brick and faced with fired brick. Each temple was a marvel of engineering and ritual. Drainage systems, corner alignments, even the sloped facades served both spiritual and practical purpose. These were not buildings made for beauty. They were made for function, to house the gods, to carry the people's voice upward, and always to reflect the order of the sky. Sumerian priests were not merely spiritual figures. They were astronomers, record keepers, calendar makers. From the high platforms of the ziggurats, they watched the stars. They named constellations, tracked planets, mapped eclipses with surprising precision. The goddess Inanna's celestial form, Venus, was particularly important. Her cycles were followed closely, rising in the east, disappearing, then returning again. Perhaps her disappearances became metaphors for absence, for descent, for the mysteries of rebirth. Other stars mattered too: the Pleiades, the path of the moon, the heliacal rising of Sirius. These patterns told the priest when to plant, when to offer, when to wait. Imagine, standing beside a temple scribe beneath the stars. He leans forward, peering at the sky through a notched measuring stick. A faint breeze lifts the fringe of his robe. The clay tablet beside him reflects the faint light of a rising moon. The temple complex was alive day and night. Within its walls, bakers prepared sacred loaves, musicians rehearsed temple hymns, voices raised in harmony with lyres and drums, cleaners swept the courtyards, water carriers moved in long lines between kitchens and storerooms. The god statue was bathed each day, perfumed, dressed in fine linen. Not because the idol was believed to eat or breathe, but because care itself was sacred. To serve the god was to serve the order of the world. This idea ran deep in the myths. The beings created by Enki and Ninhursag were not for rebellion, but for ritual. Their labour maintained the balance. The stories say they were formed from clay, given breath, shaped to serve. But in these temples, that story lived in action. The walls were painted with scenes of processions, battles, offerings. Cylinder seals carved with exquisite detail were pressed into soft clay, signatures of identity, of trade, of trust. Some showed gods in conversation, others showed humans building, farming, praying. The repetition of these images matters. They were not decorative. They were reminders of place, of purpose, even in the smallest details. The Sumerians left traces, a fingerprint in the corner of a tablet, the faint hesitation in a carved line, moments frozen in fired earth. The priests oversaw not just worship, but land ownership, taxation, and food distribution. The temple was the economic engine. Workers were categorized by role. Wages were issued in beer, grain, oil. There was hierarchy, but there was also rhythm. Imagine a young woman kneeling beside a pot of lentils. She stirs slowly, humming the beginning of a temple chant. Outside, someone chants the name of a star rising over the eastern canal. Inside, a small oil lamp flickers. It feels quiet. It feels whole. Yet beneath this intricate balance, strain was already forming. Too much salt in the soil. Too many burdens placed on the temples. Too many cities competing under the same sky. Some myths begin to turn. Stories of gods growing distant, of curses cast on once blessed cities, of confusion or chaos as collapse. The stories do not name reasons directly. They whisper them. Perhaps even the myths knew not to blame, only to record. Still, at the peak of their world, the Sumerians built something enduring. Not just temples, not just records, but a relationship with time itself. A belief that meaning could be shaped, recorded, remembered. They looked upward to the stars and downward into clay. And yet, there is more beneath the surface. Beneath the rituals and routines, something older remains. At the height of Sumer's achievements, when cities stood firm on riverbanks and ziggurats scraped the morning sky, something more subtle held the world together. Not the walls, not the gods, but the workers. The people of clay, of breath, of dust. They were not rulers, not scribes, not priests draped in linen or crowned in bronze. They were the carriers. Of stone, the diggers of canals, the ones who stirred beer pots and fired bricks. And in the oldest stories, and in the myths that slip between lore and legend, these people were not forgotten. They were explained, remembered in clay. Imagine this. The first light of the day casting pale gold over the reed roofs of a Sumerian workers' quarter. You hear sandals scuff against dry earth, soft conversations in a language now lost, the rhythmic slap of wet clay against moulds. Someone yawns, stretches, steps into the day with practiced purpose. They were not slaves in the modern sense, but their choices were narrow, bound to temple estates, to overseers, to expectations passed down in silence. Still, there was pride, tools handed from father to son, techniques refined by repetition, a wall built straight, a kiln fired just right. Labour, when done well, was its own kind of worship. In the myth of Enki and Ninhursag, the gods grow tired, weary of digging canal, of maintaining the order of the earth. To ease their burden, they shape a being made of clay, infused with the blood of a slain god, animated with purpose. It is not just a creation story, it is a labour story. The being was not created to rule, it was created to work. Some scholars suggest this reflects temple ideology. Others hear echoes of an older memory, of a shift in society, when tasks once shared by all were delegated, formalised, stratified. Perhaps this story justified the system, or perhaps it quietly mourned what had changed. Archaeologists find countless bricks stamped with the names of kings, but beneath those stamps, sometimes faintly, are fingerprints, the soft press of a hand that shaped the clay before it hardened. These are not the prints of rulers, they are the marks of the makers. In museum drawers, scholars sometimes find tablets inscribed with lists of rations, long columns of names, each receiving a daily share, of barley, oil, beer. We read them now as data, but each line is a person, a man who hauled wood, a woman who spun wool, a child who ground flour from dawn to dusk. The records do not say if they were happy, only that they were there. Imagine this, a moment of pause in the middle of a long, hot day. A group of workers gathered in the shade beside a mud brick wall, their hands dusty, their forearms marked by sun and labour. One hums a simple tune, another drinks deeply from a clay jug. No one speaks for a while. The silence is not awkward, it is earned. Above them, the stars are still hidden, but they are coming. The same stars that once looked down on the moment of their creation. The same stars that will one day watch their cities fall. Much has been written about Sumer's astronomy, its calendars, its careful watching of Venus and the moon. But that knowledge was held by a few. For most, the stars were not symbols to be mapped, they were a ceiling. Presence. A rhythm felt more than known. Perhaps the workers looked up and saw the same things the priest did, but gave them different names, different meanings, or no names at all, just light, just beauty, just stillness. The myths say they were created with intention, but that does not mean they were understood. Some interpretations of Sumerian texts suggest these created workers were not quite human, that they were a different species, a hybrid between divine and earthly. The myth of the blood sacrifice mixing a god's essence with clay suggests this. The result is something not entirely of the gods, not entirely of the earth. What does that mean? Is it metaphor? Is it memory? Is it an echo of a forgotten experiment? A hidden truth folded into myth? We may never know, and perhaps we're not meant to. As temples gleamed and scribes recorded, these workers continued, generation after generation. Their lives unnamed in story were but essential to it. Without them, no ziggurat would rise, no statue would stand, no god would be fed. Perhaps they knew this. Perhaps they didn't need stories. Perhaps the work itself was enough. But the system was fragile. Over time, soil weakened, wars increased, burdens grew, and those who once served the gods began to carry too much. Something had to give. The Golden Age was never still. Even in its beauty, it moved. And what moved forward eventually begins to shift beneath the surface. Beneath the surface meaning beneath the lists and ledgers and prayers, there is something else. A layer not carved in stone, but traced in silence. Something woven into the alignments, into the architecture, into the stories passed down like breath. It's not just what the Sumerians built, it's how they built it, where they placed it, what they pointed it toward, and what it might still be pointing at now. The ziggurats of Sumer were not placed at random. Many of them, like those at Ur and Nippur, are aligned with startling precision to the cardinal points, north, south, east, west. Their corners mirror the geometry of the horizon, long before compasses existed. How did they know? Some suggest they used simple tools, wooden poles, shadows, strings pulled taut in morning light. Others think they watched the stars, patiently, night after night. Perhaps it wasn't just observation. Perhaps it was reverence. The Sumerians did not separate the sky from the earth. Above and below were mirrors, partners, reflections. Maybe they believed that to please the gods, one must imitate their precision, and so they aligned temples to Venus, marked the rise of Sirius, tracked the moon's arc. Even today, we can still trace these alignments, and they still whisper. The Sumerians did not leave behind towering stone monuments like the Egyptians or the Maya, but what they shaped in mud brick, they shaped with intention. Walls were not walls, merely functional. They followed proportions: courtyards, chambers, doorways, designed to echo a sense of cosmic balance. Some researchers believe they followed a base unit of measure called the kuz, used consistently, from canals to temples, a kind of rhythm, a heartbeat, running through the land. What if each structure was a kind of clock, or a calendar, or a tool to harmonise with unseen forces? Perhaps, perhaps not. But the repetition suggests purpose. The care suggests memory. Small, portable, often overlooked. Cylinder seals were personal, functional, and deeply symbolic. When rolled across wet clay, they left behind scenes that folded myth into motion. One seal shows a figure seated, others approaching with outstretched arms. A god? A judge? A hybrid being acting as a gatekeeper between dimensions. Another shows what looks like instruments, curved lines, shapes some interpret as stars, were they decorative or diagrams. Some believe these seals encode cosmology. Others suggest they were protection, magical devices, talismans of alignment. What if they were both? Art and astronomy, prayer and precision. Each seal, a whisper passed through generations. Each mark, a symbol of something just out of reach. Enki, the god of wisdom, water and creation, features in myths and monuments with quiet regularity. He is said to dwell in the deep, in the watery abyss called the Abzu, but some researchers suggest more. They believe the story of Enki may encode a forgotten understanding of hydraulic systems, canals that mirror river branches, underground chambers beneath temples that manage pressure. The Temple of Enki at Eridu, one of the oldest known, includes channels beneath its floors. Were they symbolic, functional, both? Perhaps the Abzu was not just a realm, but a blueprint, a message in water. The silence beneath the floor, the cool darkness of still channels, remembers more than we know. The Sumerians moved massive quantities of material, organised tens of thousands, constructed perfectly level canals across great distances. How? Without pulleys, without wheels in the early period, without complex tools. What if they had systems of knowledge now forgotten? Not magical, but practical, patient, precise. We assume they lacked what we value, but perhaps they had what we have lost: time, attention, silence. Some researchers suggest the bricks were placed according to vibrations or sound patterns. There is no proof, but then again, the absence of noise is not the absence of design. Above it all, the sky continued to move, quietly, predictably. The Sumerians knew this. They knew the stars did not hurry, so they didn't either. Perhaps that's the real lesson of these hidden dimensions. Not technology, not conspiracy, but pace and listening. And the stillness beneath the visible world. Even today, when you stand among the ruins, or trace your fingers along the grooves of a tablet, you can feel it. That patience, that order, that waiting. Why such precise alignments? What deeper meanings lie behind their mythic metaphors? How did they manage such coordination without modern tools? And most importantly, why did they embed so much meaning in what seems mundane? We may never know. And maybe we're not meant to. But the silence left behind is not empty. It holds something. Beneath the language of worship, beneath the physical rituals and temple routines, another layer waits. It doesn't speak in prayers, or offerings, or laws. It speaks in symbols, in directions, in hidden geometry, a language of placement, of pattern, of stars. The Sumerians built their world carefully, not just for utility, but to reflect something greater, something beyond. The temples of Sumer, especially those at Uruk, Eridu and Nippur, are often described as the homes of the gods. But what if they were more than homes? What if they were maps, not maps of territory, maps of the sky, or of sacred cycles, or even of inner states? Some researchers note that the layout of certain temples mimics constellations. Others observe alignments to solstices, equinoxes, lunar risings. The ziggurat at Ur, for example. Its corners don't just point to cardinal directions. Its staircases, 3 of them, may mirror the celestial steps between earth and the heavens. Perhaps they were meant to help the gods descend, or to help humans rise. What if each layer of the ziggurat was a realm? Earth, sky, stars, and beyond. When Enki and Ninhursag shaped the first workers, they didn't create randomly. The myth describes parts of the body being afflicted, then healed. The rib, the arm, the heart, the eyes. Some scholars suggest this is a metaphor for medicine, others for the energetic body. Points of alignment, centres of power. Is it possible that these gods were describing more than physical forms? What if the story of creation was also a story of calibration? A way of tuning the body to match the heavens? Enki's association with water, with wisdom, with the subterranean Abzu, could also represent intuition, depth, subconscious knowing. Ninhursag, the mountain goddess, the one who gives birth, could signify the manifest world, physical life. Together, perhaps they weren't just forming clay, they were forming a bridge. Cylinder seals are some of the most mysterious artifacts the Sumerians left behind, pressed into clay. Their images roll out in procession, repeating, elegant, compact. But many of them depict scenes that are not easy to explain. Winged figures with rods and rings, humans kneeling before strange trees, creatures not quite animal, not quite man. One seal, now in the British Museum, shows what some believe to be a solar system, a central orb, surrounded by smaller spheres. Perhaps it's just an artistic arrangement, perhaps it's symbolic, or what if it reflects something they truly saw, or were told? What if these seals were compressed messages, not for everyone, but for those trained to read their secrets? The temples may have echoed in ways we no longer understand. Some archaeologists speculate about intentional acoustics in chamber construction, the way sound carries, the way it settles. Could it be that chants weren't just devotional, but technical? That hymns aligned the body with the building as the building with the stars? What if sound was a forgotten tool, not just for ceremony, but for construction, or even healing? Some temples feature pits and wells beneath the central altar. Silent spaces, still water. What were they listening to down there? The Sumerians did not label their secrets. They embedded them in measurements, in stories, in rituals repeated so often they became invisible. Take the sexagesimal system, the base 60 mathematics. Why 60? Why such a complex structure? Unless it mirrored something larger. It aligns with celestial divisions, with circles, with time, with motion of planets. It divides cleanly into 12s, into 30s, into patterns echoed in the sky. What if the Sumerians weren't just counting crops? What if they were counting cycles? And what if the stories of gods weren't just metaphors, but ways to preserve those cycles through myth, so they wouldn't be forgotten, even if the numbers were? So much of what we find today is incomplete. A broken tablet, a half-worn seal, a single phrase without context. And yet, it hums. The stillness holds something, a knowledge that was not shouted, but whispered. Pressed into clay with the pressure of memory, we're left asking, who was this knowledge meant for? Was it common or guarded? Was it taught openly or initiated slowly? And why did they bury so much of it in plain sight? Perhaps they knew we'd come looking, perhaps not. But the system remains scattered yet persistent, waiting. What if each myth is a map? What if each structure is a mirror? What if we have misunderstood the purpose of clay, of worship, of time itself? The stars still follow the same paths. The earth still turns under the same constellations. The ruins do not explain, but they do point to something that cannot be measured, only felt, only glimpsed. Beneath the visible architecture of temples and texts, something less tangible hums quietly, not carved in relief, not etched into clay, but perhaps felt, a resonance, a hidden frequency, a vibration beneath the structure of the world the Sumerians left behind. What if their greatest technologies were not made of bronze or brick, but of sound, timing, alignment? Some ancient structures seem to listen, in temples across Mesopotamia, and particularly in the sacred precincts of Eridu and Ur. The echoes behave strangely. Whispers carry in odd ways. Footsteps feel heavier, softer, depending on where you stand. No ancient Sumerian treatise on acoustics survives. And yet, the experience remains. Perhaps the builders knew something about resonance, or perhaps they stumbled into it through centuries of rebuilding, adjusting, listening. In the central chambers of temples, it is easy to imagine low chanting, a slow beat matched to breath, rising and falling like a tide. What if these sounds were more than ritual? What if they were calibrating something unseen? Maybe the ziggurat wasn't only a platform, maybe it was a tuning fork, shaped by myth, activated by sound. Sumerian mathematics remains one of their most impressive legacies. They used a sexagesimal system, base 60, far more complex than the base 10 we use today. Why 60? Why divide time into 60 minutes? Angles into 360 degrees, when fingers only give us 10? Some researchers believe the choice wasn't arbitrary, that base 60 allowed smoother divisions, finer calibrations, that it mirrors celestial cycles. The number 60 divides evenly into 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30. Perhaps it wasn't just mathematical convenience. Perhaps it was cosmological harmony. What if their numerical system wasn't just for counting grain, but for syncing human time with star time? We still use fragments of their system, but have we forgotten the reason behind it? The silence surrounding these choices remains. Excavations at sites like Nippur and Uruk show city planning far older than expected. Grids, main roads aligned with solar movement, secondary streets shadowing the paths of canals. Some scholars suggest the entire city was a model of the universe, not symbolic, but functional. Perhaps walking the main road at sunrise was a kind of pilgrimage. Perhaps entering the temple wasn't just a ritual, but a reenactment of cosmic order. Imagine a citizen of Ur stepping into the temple courtyard. The morning sun casts a beam exactly along the east-west axis. The columns cast shadows. Predictable. Precise. Did they feel this alignment in their bones? Did it matter, even if they couldn't explain it? What if the city was a mirror, and its people were stars moving through their appointed orbits? We often ask, what tools did they use? What devices built these walls? How did they calculate such precision without instruments? But perhaps the tools weren't external. What if they measured with breath, with rhythm, with shared memory passed through generations? There are theories, fringe to some, intriguing to others, suggesting the use of harmonic frequencies, that some structures worldwide may have been designed to respond to natural vibrations of the earth. Could the ziggurats of Sumer have done the same? The layers of mud brick, the exact angles, were they just structural, or were they part of a forgotten instrument? The evidence is partial, but the silence invites the question. Sumerian myths are dense with symbolism. The Abzu, the watery deep ruled by Enki, often interpreted as a literal underworld or aquifer. But what if it also referred to the unconscious, the inner wellspring of intuition and insight? The me, a mysterious term describing divine decrees or principles, were not physical objects. They were powers, forms of knowing, gifts of order given to humanity. Some were obvious, truth, kingship, weaving. Others, more puzzling, the art of the hero, the bitter-toothed reed. What if the me were fragments of something lost, a system of understanding, of memory? They weren't tools to be used. They were realities to be embodied, maybe even frequencies to be held. Amid all this complexity, the Sumerians still made room for silence. Temples had inner sanctums, small, dark, quiet, a place where no worker entered, where the god dwelled in stillness. These were not spaces of spectacle, they were spaces of pause. Perhaps those chambers mirrored a truth the Sumerians knew deeply, that to receive something greater, one must first make space. In the stillness, we feel alignment, not with noise, but with rhythm, not with motion, but with rest. What if every structure was a frequency? What if every number was a note? What if every brick, laid in silence, still remembers the hum of ancient hands? What if they did not need metal tools to build what mattered most? What if they built with attention, with memory, with deep time woven into movement. We cannot prove these things, and perhaps that's the point. Mystery remains, intact, unbothered. The question that echoes through every excavation, every translated tablet, every quiet moment spent beside ancient brick and carved seal, is this. Why were they created? Why did the gods, if the Sumerian myths are to be taken as more than poetry, shape a being from clay and give it breath? Some scholars point to practicality. The earliest written tablets describe workers, rations, brick counts, labour divisions. Perhaps they say the myths emerged to explain a truth already lived, that society needed labour, and the gods as reflections of the elite justified it through sacred origin stories. Others suggest something deeper, that the myths are not explanations, but memories. Encoded recollections of an event long before cities, long before kings, when something new entered the human world. A being not quite like others. Maybe it was genetic engineering, they suggest. Maybe it was symbolic. Or maybe the story was told because it held something we still don't understand. In the myth of Enki and Ninhursag, the first beings created to relieve the gods of labour are not born from love or curiosity. They are born from exhaustion. The gods are tired. They dig canals. They maintain order. And so they make something that can help. This origin feels different from other creation myths. Not an act of celebration, but of necessity. Maybe even reluctance. Why clay? Why blood from a slain god? Why form something in such a mixture of matter and spirit? Some believe the blood represents divine energy, consciousness, spark. Others read it as an echo of real sacrifice, ritual perhaps, and a few imagine a literal event, something lost to time, when the merging of God and earth was not just myth, but method. We may never know, and maybe that's okay. Sumer is not alone in this story. Across the globe, in different times and languages, echoes appear. In ancient Egypt, the god Khnum forms people on a potter's wheel. In the Hebrew tradition, Adam is shaped from earth. In Mesoamerican myth, humans are formed first from mud, then from wood, then from maize. Always, the idea of humans being shaped, formed, crafted with purpose. What if this is a shared memory? A whisper that survived across oceans and time? Or maybe the earth as material was simply universal. Clay is everywhere, and hands want to shape what they can hold. Still, the pattern lingers. Some scholars believe these stories were codes, not lies, not history, but containers. Perhaps the myths preserved something sacred through symbols. Perhaps they were never meant to be understood literally, but not dismissed either. The blood of the god might mean energy, the clay, mortality, the shaping, intention. What if the hybrid was not a new being, but a new awareness, a shift in consciousness, from instinct to understanding, from animal to human, from servant to storyteller? Another possibility, maybe the beings were not shaped by gods at all. Maybe the gods were shaped by beings. Some suggest that what we call gods were ancestral memories, idealized forms, visitors even in fringe interpretations. What if the Sumerians encountered something, someone, and preserved the story the only way they knew how, through metaphor and reverence? Or maybe these weren't gods at all. Maybe the beings were real, and the stories were the only way to keep their names alive. A few even imagine extraterrestrial intervention, that the hybrids were literal combinations, part human, part something else. It's hard to say. We have no bones, no evidence beyond story, but we do have the silence those stories leave behind, and that silence hums with possibility. We know the myths exist. We know they are old. We know they speak of creation, of labour, of divine fatigue. We know the workers were made to serve. We know they were shaped from clay. We know they were not divine, but carried something of the gods within them. We don't know why the story was told. We don't know if it reflects truth or truth wrapped in dream. We don't know if it was meant for us, or just left behind. Perhaps the story was never meant to be understood, only felt. What if the hybrid being wasn't someone else, but a mirror? What if it was always meant to reflect our own split nature, the body and the breath, the mud and the mind. Maybe the Sumerians were not explaining the past, but describing the human condition, that we are made for labour, but dream of stars, that we are heavy with earth, but longing for sky, that we serve systems we did not build, but wonder if we could someday change them. We may never know what the myth truly meant. We may never decode the seals. We may never stand where the gods once did, if they ever did at all. But that doesn't lessen the story. If anything, it strengthens it. Because mystery invites return. It invites reflection. It invites humility. And maybe that's what the Sumerians understood better than we do. That not every question needs an answer. Some just need space. And silence. The more we learn, the more we realise how much we don't understand. That's the strange grace of ancient mystery. Each tablet translated, each ruin uncovered, each alignment measured, offers answers. But just as often, it raises new questions, larger ones, older ones. And so, we arrive at the deeper layer of the Sumerian story. The one that doesn't just ask what was built, or when, but why. A small clay tablet, no larger than a hand, contains hundreds of symbols. A single seal, rolled once across damp clay, can whisper a dozen stories. Some scholars believe this was about compression. Information was precious, and space was limited. So they layered meaning, symbol over symbol, ritual over record. Others suggest something else, that the layering wasn't about efficiency, it was about secrecy, preservation. Perhaps certain knowledge wasn't meant for everyone. Or maybe it wasn't knowledge at all. Maybe it was memory. We may never know. And perhaps we're not meant to. Were the myths told for the common people, to explain their place in the divine order, to justify the endless cycles of work and worship? Or were they for the priests, a code, passed down through generations, to be interpreted only through ritual, silence, and time? Some scholars believe the myths served as political tools. Others see them as deeply spiritual blueprints. A few imagine they were echoes of a long-lost encounter, one so profound it could only be retold as myth. What if the beings described weren't metaphors? What if they were visitors, or ancestors, or inventions long forgotten, but once real? We don't know. And maybe that's where the beauty lies. The central question remains: why would divine beings create another species just only to make them toil? It's not a story of compassion. It's not even a story of ambition. It's a story of necessity. The gods are tired, and they need help. Some scholars say this reflects temple life, where masses laboured under priestly rule. Others suggest it reveals a fundamental truth about humanity's relationship with power. A few imagine something else, that this was a memory of interference, of design, of beings shaped, not by evolution alone, but by intention. Perhaps it is a story of control, or perhaps it is a story of trust, of shared burden. This is where the line between archaeology and myth begins to blur. What if the stories aren't allegory, but encoded history? The Sumerians speak of beings from the stars. They describe the Abzu, not just as water, but as a realm beneath. They name the Mi, gifts or laws handed down. Mysterious, powerful. Some believe these are spiritual principles. Others wonder if they were technologies, or energies, or simply lost teachings. Perhaps what they remembered, we have forgotten. Or perhaps we never knew. We may never know. It's not just Sumer, creation from clay, appears in Egypt, in the Hebrew Bible, in Mesoamerica. The idea of sky beings descending, of sacred knowledge handed down, of hybrid beings born from gods and earth. What if these myths are fragments of a shared past, scattered, reshaped by culture and climate, but pointing to the same original moment? Or maybe these are human archetypes, stories born from our deep need to make sense of work, suffering, wonder. Some scholars argue for cultural diffusion, others believe in independent invention, but a few, they whisper something different, that maybe, just maybe, we are remembering the same forgotten thing. Their knowledge of astronomy was advanced, their mathematics precise, their social systems complex. But what if there was more, not lost in destruction, but hidden intentionally. Perhaps they encoded certain truths in stories to protect them, or to preserve them for a future that would understand. Maybe they whispered knowledge into the bricks of their ziggurats, hummed it into hymns, folded it into ritual. We cannot read that language now, but we feel it. Somewhere beneath the noise of modern life, it waits, still. Maybe these stories weren't meant to explain origins. Maybe they were meant to teach humility, that even the gods grow weary, that labour isn't punishment, but a path, that creation always comes with cost. What if the myths weren't meant to satisfy curiosity? What if they were meant to awaken wonder, to invite reflection, not resolution? Maybe the point was never to know, but to ask, and ask gently, and accept that silence is also an answer. We may never know what the Sumerians truly believed. We may never uncover every layer, every intention, every buried truth, but in that unknowing, there is peace, because mystery has weight. It asks us to slow down, to listen, to notice. It reminds us that we are not the first to wonder, and we will not be the last. The civilization fell, as all do. The cities emptied, the walls crumbled, the canals dried, and the language, once etched into soft clay with such deliberate care, went silent. But memory has its own architecture. It does not live only in stone, or in temples, or even in tablets. It lives in story. And stories, they drift, they travel, they wait. Even now, the myths of Enki and Ninhursag survive, carried not through an unbroken chain of record, but through layers of forgetting and rediscovery. Carried by the very clay that once held the first contracts, the first names, the first moments when humans pressed meaning into matter. The Sumerians disappeared so thoroughly that for nearly 2,000 years, no one even remembered their name. By the time Greek historians wrote of ancient Mesopotamia, the Sumerians were already ghosts. Their cities buried beneath layers of later empires, Babylonian, Assyrian, Persian. It wasn't until the 19th century, when archaeologists began digging into the mounds of southern Iraq, that their world began to re-emerge. At first, only fragments. Odd bricks, broken statues, seals with strange, wedge-like marks, cuneiform, the writing of the gods, as it was once called. Even now, where we're still translating, still assembling, still piecing together the story tablet by tablet, some of the most significant finds, like the Enuma Elish, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the Enki and Ninhursag myth, were recovered from the ruins of Nippur, and later the Great Library of Ashurbanipal, copied, preserved, buried, then uncovered by modern hands. Perhaps it's fitting. A civilization that told of beings shaped from clay left its memory buried in clay. Even now the myths speak, not as literal records, perhaps, but as containers of meaning. Modern scholars study them line by line, comparing translations, tracing symbolism, asking new questions. What did it mean that did? Humans were created to carry the weight of the gods. Why describe that creation with such humility, such care? Why place it at the centre of their sacred storytelling? Maybe because they saw something of themselves in that role. Or maybe they saw something of us. Even today, the story of Enki and Ninhursag finds new listeners. In classrooms, in documentaries, in quiet corners of the internet where wonder still gathers. The questions have not faded. They've only changed shape. The Sumerian legacy is not limited to myth. It lives in systems we still use. The 60-minute hour, the 360-degree circle, the way we divide the heavens into constellations. Even now, when we track the moon's phases, when we mark the equinox, when we follow the stars for time and season, we're echoing what the Sumerians once did. Their knowledge survived not because it was shouted, but because it was useful and beautiful and quietly true. Perhaps that's how memory always survives. For centuries, no one could read cuneiform. The tablets sat in museums, in storerooms, in crates marked unknown. But the language waited, like the stars, like the rivers, like the breath beneath a story. In 1857, a group of scholars cracked the code, not with computers, not with magic, but with patience. They compared signs, they trusted repetition, they listened to the clay, And slowly, the voices returned. Even now, hundreds of thousands of tablets remain untranslated, each one a doorway, each one a silence that might still speak. Archaeological work in Mesopotamia continues. New sites are uncovered. Old ones are re-examined with modern tools, satellite imaging, remote sensing, digital reconstruction. Even now, we're finding new versions of familiar myths, alternate endings, lost names, hints at different interpretations. What we thought we knew shifts. Perhaps there was never just one version of the story. Perhaps each city had its own telling, its own truth. Even now, we are listening. Civilizations rise, they shine, they forget, and they fall. But memory doesn't always fall with them. It just buries itself, like seeds. The Sumerians were forgotten, then remembered, then misremembered, then remembered again. It's possible. This will happen to us too. It's possible. One day, our own myths, our science, our systems, our stories will be dust beneath someone else's feet, and maybe they'll wonder about us, as we wonder about them. Even now, when you look at the stars, you're seeing what the Sumerians saw, the same constellations, the same rhythms, the same quiet turning of night into day, and maybe, when you pause to ask the great questions, why we are here, what we are meant to do, where labour ends and meaning begins, you're joining a very old conversation. The myth of Enki and Ninhursag isn't just about gods or clay. It's about us, our burden, our brilliance, our longing to be more than what we're told we are. And so, the story continues. Not just in books, not just in museums, but in you. In the wonder you carry, in the silence you keep, in the breath between questions. And now, the story quiets. The names grow faint again. The cities return to dust. The myths rest once more in their clay envelopes. What was uncovered, shared, remembered, slowly folds back into silence. And that's okay. Not all things are meant to remain loud. Here, in the stillness of this moment, you are no longer standing in temples or among ruins. You're right where you were before we began. Maybe it's still night. Maybe the air around you is soft, or cool, or holding the last warmth of the day. Either way, you're here now. And even now, the stars still move overhead. The same stars the Sumerians watched, rising slowly beyond the curve of their ziggurats, watched by priests with quiet breath and steady hands. They haven't changed, not really. The constellations still tell time. The planets still keep their long, looping rhythm. The wind still passes over the mounds where cities once stood. It moves through broken walls, brushes past doorways that no longer open, carries fine grains of earth across courtyards where workers once sang to themselves while shaping clay. Maybe those cities were never truly lost. Maybe they were always just resting. Even now, cuneiform tablets lie buried in the earth, untouched. Even now, stories wait in languages we're still learning how to hear. Even now, there are patterns we haven't noticed, meanings that haven't reached us, questions that haven't yet formed. And maybe they never will, and maybe they don't need to, because some stories are not puzzles to solve. They are places to sit, to breathe, to feel time slow down. The mystery endures, not as a riddle, but as a rhythm. The silence is not an absence. It is a presence, and as the stars move slowly overhead, as they always have, the ruins remain, the tablets sleep, the breath between questions deepens, and somewhere, always, someone is listening, someone is wondering, and the wind moves on, and the clay cools beneath the sky, and the story continues, just like this, quietly, gently, forever.